You're a soprano, and your choir director keeps telling you to project more on the high notes. You're singing as loudly as you can. Your throat is tight. You're pushing from your diaphragm, doing everything you were taught about support, and somehow the altos still sound louder. The tenors cut through effortlessly. You feel like you're working twice as hard and getting half the result. But what if the problem isn't your technique? What if the problem isn't your effort? What if it's that you're trying to use an acoustic strategy that doesn't work for your voice type? Whether you're singing classical repertoire, musical theater, pop, or gospel, as you ascend in pitch, your voice needs to make acoustic adjustments to maintain intensity and avoid sudden register shifts. Skilled sopranos do this systematically, often starting these adjustments a full octave before they become acoustically critical. This isn't stylistic preference, it's acoustic survival. Without this adjustment, your voice loses intensity and wants to flip registers. Last week, we talked about how male voices project through the singer's formant. That formant clustering around 3 kHz that creates massive acoustic boost where the human ear is most sensitive. But that strategy doesn't work for sopranos. Your fundamental frequency routinely exceeds 500 Hz, often reaching 1000 Hz or higher. When your fundamental gets that high, fewer harmonics fall in that 3 kHz region. You can't rely on that energy cluster the way tenors, baritones, and basses do. You need a completely different acoustic approach. I'm Drew Williams Orozco, and this is the Voice Science Podcast. In this episode, part 2 of our 5-episode Formant Series, I'm explaining F1 to FO tuning, the formant strategy that high voices use to project in the upper range. I'll explain why vowel modification is acoustically necessary, not a failure of technique. And I'll give you specific practical strategies for making these adjustments smoothly so your upper range feels easy instead of forced. When Garnier's team studied professional sopranos in 2010, they found something fascinating. These singers were systematically raising their first formant, F1, to match their rising pitch, creating optimal acoustic conditions for projection. And they weren't waiting till the last second to do it. They were starting these adjustments way earlier than you'd expect, setting themselves up for success. Before we dive in, an important note. The research I'm discussing today is based primarily on classical and operatic singers who need to project acoustically without amplification. If you're singing CCM styles with a microphone, you may have more flexibility in your choices, and the modifications may be less extreme. But vowel modification at higher pitches happens in all styles. The acoustic principles remain the same. It's the degree and timing that differ based on amplification and aesthetic demands. If you're a soprano or a mezzo, this episode is for you. If you're a high tenor singing contemporary repertoire in your upper range, this applies to you too. And if you teach high voices, understanding this acoustic reality will transform how you guide vowel modifications. Altos, next week's episode is specifically for you, covering the hybrid approach you need. And if you're a bass, baritone, or alto, stick around. Understanding how high voices solve these acoustic challenges will deepen your understanding of your own formant strategies and give you the insight into the full picture of vocal acoustics. Let's dive in. A quick recap from last week. Male voices, tenors, baritones, basses, and altos in their lower and middle range achieve projection through the singer's formant. That's the clustering of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th vocal tract formants, all bunching together around 3 kHz. This creates a concentrated boost of acoustic energy in a frequency region where the human ear is maximally sensitive. This strategy works brilliantly for male voices because their fundamental frequencies typically stay below 500 Hz across most of their range. A tenor singing in A4, that's 440 Hz, has harmonics spaced at 440 Hz intervals, 440, 880, 1320, 1760, 2200, and higher. Multiple harmonics land right in that 3 kHz singer's formant region, getting amplified. The result? Acoustic power without excessive vocal effort. But here's the soprano problem. When your fundamental frequency rises above 500 Hz, which happens routinely in the upper soprano range, the harmonics space out. A soprano singing in A5, 880 Hz, has harmonics at 880, 1760, 2640, and 3520 Hz and higher. The fundamental is now twice as high, so harmonics are spaced twice as far apart compared to a tenor's A4. Fewer harmonics fall in any given frequency region, including the singer's formant region around 3 kHz. And if you're singing a C6 around 1000 Hz, you're down to just one harmonic anywhere near the singer's formant region. One harmonic can't create the same concentrated energy boost that multiple harmonics create. The acoustic math just doesn't work the same way. You can't rely on that 3 kHz energy cluster to carry your voice over an orchestra or through a large hall the way male voices do. The singer's formant strategy becomes less and less effective as pitch rises above roughly E5. So what do you do instead? Formant tuning, specifically tuning your first resonance to your fundamental frequency. This isn't a backup plan because the singer's formant doesn't work. It's the optimal acoustic strategy for high fundamental frequencies. When you understand what your voice needs acoustically and work with those requirements instead of against them, singing in your upper range becomes easier, more efficient, and more sustainable. If you're struggling on high notes, it might not be a breath support problem or a registration problem. It might be an acoustic mismatch between your fundamental frequency and your vocal tract resonance. And that's something you can learn to manage. What is F1? What is FO? Before we go further, let's make sure we're clear on what F1 and FO actually are, because these terms are going to come up a lot. Fundamental frequency, FO, is just the pitch you're singing. A5, that's 880 Hz. C6, that's around 1000 Hz. It's how fast your vocal folds are vibrating. Now, F1, your first formant, is different. It's the first resonance of your vocal tract, the lowest resonance frequency. In research literature, you'll often see it called R1 for resonance, especially when measuring vocal tract resonances directly. F1 is the standard pedagogical term. F1 is controlled primarily by jaw opening and tongue height. The more you open your jaw and you lower your tongue, the higher F1 becomes. Close your jaw and raise your tongue, F1 lowers. In speech, F1 defines vowel quality. The vowel E, as in C, has an F1 around 250 to 270 Hz. The vowel U, as in boot, has an F1 around 300 Hz. The vowel A, as in father, has an F1 around 700 to 900 Hz. These are typical values for female singers. Let's say you're singing an E on E5, that's 660 Hz. Your fundamental is 660 Hz, but F1 for an E in speech is around 270 Hz. Your fundamental is now more than double your first formant. What happens? Harm Schut studied exactly this question back in 1986. What breaks down when FO exceeds F1 in soprano voices? Several things, and they're all problematic. First, acoustic energy drops dramatically. The fundamental frequency, which is the strongest component of your voice source, is no longer getting amplified by F1. It's sitting above the formant peak, in a region where your vocal tract provides less amplification. Second, vowel definition deteriorates. Vowels are defined by the relationships between formants, primarily F1 and F2. When your fundamental exceeds F1, the harmonic structure doesn't sample those formants the way it does at lower pitches, and vowel identity becomes harder to perceive. Third, the voice becomes unstable. You might feel like it wants to flip into falsetto, or it might just lose intensity suddenly. Singers often describe this as the note disappearing or my voice just gave out. It's not a vocal fold problem. It's not a breath support problem. It's an acoustical problem created by fundamental frequency exceeding F1. The solution is to raise F1 to match the rising fundamental frequency. How do you raise F1? Two primary adjustments. First, jaw opening. The more vertical space you create in your mouth, the higher F1 becomes. Second, lowering the tongue. F1 is controlled by tongue height, how high or low the tongue sits in your mouth. The lower the tongue, the higher F1 becomes. Together, these adjustments raise F1, and when you raise F1 to approximate your fundamental frequency, you're tuning your first formant to your fundamental. That's F1 to FO tuning. Acoustically, what this does is put F1 right where it can amplify your fundamental frequency, the strongest component of your voice. Instead of your fundamental sitting above F1 in an acoustically unfavorable position, it's now aligned with F1, getting maximum amplification. The result? Your voice suddenly has intensity again, projection returns, and the note feels stable instead of precarious. Trained sopranos use F1 to FO tuning systematically in the upper range, typically starting around E5 and continuing through the top of the range. Joliveau, Smith, and Wolfe documented this in their 2004 study of professional sopranos, and Garnier's team confirmed the pattern in 2010 with even more detailed measurements. Don't wait until your fundamental frequency actually exceeds F1 to start making adjustments. Begin raising F1 earlier, often a full octave below where it becomes acoustically critical. Why start so early? Because gradual modification sounds natural. Abrupt modification sounds awkward. If you wait until you're singing an A5 to suddenly drop your jaw and lower your tongue, the vowel transformation is so dramatic that it's perceptually jarring. But if you start making subtle adjustments at A4 and then slightly more at C5, then a bit more at E5, by the time you reach A5, the vowel has migrated smoothly through the vowel space. It sounds like a musical intentional choice instead of an acoustic emergency. Practically, F1 to FO tuning feels like progressive vowel opening as you ascend in pitch. The vowel E on C5 might feel relatively speech-like. Your jaw is at a fairly normal position, your tongue is relatively high. But as you ascend to E5, you start opening the jaw slightly, lowering the tongue slightly. The vowel begins to shift from E towards I as in bit. By A5, that vowel has opened further. It's now closer to an E as in bet. Your jaw is significantly more open than speech I. Your tongue is notably lower. By C6, the vowel is essentially A as in cat, or even approaching A as in father. If someone recorded you and played it back, they might not identify that vowel as E at all. But in context, with consonants, with musical phrasing, with the text around it, the vowel still conveys the intended sound. And at E6 and above, research shows that all vowels tend to converge towards A-like qualities regardless of what you intended. At that pitch, 1,319 Hz, there's simply no way to maintain speech vowel distinctions. The acoustic requirements of F1 to FO tuning override vowel identity. I'm going to level with you about something. You cannot maintain speech vowels in the upper soprano range when you need acoustic projection. It's not acoustically viable. It's not a question of skill level or training quality, it's physics. When you're singing a C6 on the vowel E, you're not actually singing speech E. You're singing a modified vowel that retains some E-like characteristics. Maybe lip spreading, maybe some sense of brightness, but acoustically, it's a different vowel entirely. F1 has been raised from around 270 Hz to somewhere close to 1000 Hz to match your fundamental frequency. That's not E anymore. That's a vowel with a very high F1, which in speech would be A or E. And that's okay. That's not a failure. If you've been feeling like you're cheating or giving up when you open vowels in the upper range, you're not. The difference between consistent and inconsistent upper range singing isn't whether vowel modification happens, it's how smoothly and how early it begins. Now, this is specifically true for acoustic singing. Classical, opera, musical theater in large venues without amplification. CCM singers using microphones may maintain more speech-like vowels longer because amplification reduces projection demands. But even with a mic, style-specific aesthetics often require vowel modification. Belt quality, twang, the brightness demanded by the genre. The acoustic principles are the same. It's the degree and timing that may differ. Let's get specific about how vowel modification actually works across your range. Different vowels require different amounts of modification because they start from different speech F1 values. Speech F1 for A is already relatively high, 700 to 900 Hz for most female singers. If you're singing A on an E5, 660 Hz, your speech F1 is actually already close to your fundamental frequency. You don't need dramatic modification until you get significantly higher, maybe not until G5 or A5. Even at C6, A requires less modification than other vowels because you're starting from a higher baseline. Practically, this is why teachers often tell you to practice high notes on A first. It's not arbitrary. It's the easiest vowel for F1 to FO tuning because speech F1 is already relatively high. Speech F1 for these vowels sits in a middle range, roughly 400 to 600 Hz, depending on the specific vowel and your vocal tract. These vowels require moderate modification. You'll start opening them slightly as you approach E5, progressively increasing the modification as you ascend. These are the most challenging vowels for F1 to FO tuning because their speech F1 values are so low. E has F1 around 230 to 270 Hz. U has F1 around 300 Hz. These vowels require the most dramatic modification. Let's walk through a specific example. You're singing a scale on E. C5, 523 Hz. Your speech F1 for E is around 270 Hz. So your fundamental frequency is already approaching twice F1. You are probably already starting with the subtle modification here. Slightly more jaw opening than speech E, slightly lower tongue. The vowel still feels like E, but you're beginning the migration process. E5 at 660 Hz. Now your fundamental is more than double speech F1. You need more significant modification. The vowel shifts noticeably more towards I as in bit, more jaw opening, lower tongue position. It doesn't sound exactly like speech E anymore, but it's recognizable as an I-ish quality. Your fundamental is now more than 3 times speech F1 for E. Significant modification required. The vowel has migrated to something closer to E as in bet. Your jaw is quite open. Your tongue is notably lowered. This might feel like you're distorting the vowel, but acoustically, you're doing exactly what you need to do. Your fundamental is now nearly 4 times speech F1 for E. The vowel is essentially A as in cat, or approaching A as in father. To someone listening without context, this might not sound like I at all, but with consonants, musical phrasing, and context, the text remains intelligible. All vowels converge to A-like qualities. You're raising F1 to approximately 1319 Hz to match your fundamental frequency. There's no way to maintain vowel distinctions at this pitch while also maintaining acoustic efficiency. Voice pedagogue Barbara Doscher used the term vowel migration to describe this phenomenon. Vowels don't stay static as pitch changes. They migrate through vowel space, change shifting from one vowel quality towards another as acoustic demands change. E migrates towards I, then towards E, then towards A, then toward A. U migrates toward then towards A, then toward A. This isn't random. It's systematic. It follows the acoustic requirement to raise F1 as fundamental frequency rises. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Vowel intelligibility. At high pitches, listeners struggle to identify vowels accurately, even when professional singers are doing everything possible to differentiate them. Chan and Do studied this recently with Cantonese sopranos. They found that vowel identification accuracy progressively declines at high pitches, particularly as fundamental frequency rises well above speech F1 values. But this isn't a new finding. Gottfried and Chu documented the same pattern in 1986 with English vowels. Why? Because vowel identity in speech is defined by the relationships between formants, primarily F1 and F2. But when you're doing F1 to FO tuning, you're raising F1 to match your fundamental frequency. You're overriding the speech formant pattern. The vowel might retain some perceptual qualities through other cues, lip position, brightness, tongue fronting, but the primary acoustic definition of vowel identity is gone. So, how do audiences understand the text in opera? 3 ways. First, consonants. Consonants provide huge amounts of linguistic information. If you're singing C on a high note, the S consonant tells the listener what word you're singing, even if the vowel is acoustically closer to an ah than an e. Second, context. Musical phrasing, the text that came before, the dramatic situation. All of this provides context that helps listeners fill in what the vowel is supposed to be. Third, familiarity. If audiences know the aria, they know what the text is supposed to be, and they hear what they expect to hear, even if the acoustic signal is ambiguous. Vowel modification is not a failure of technique, it's acoustic necessity. The skill you're building is not how to maintain speech vowels in the upper range. That's not acoustically viable. It's how to modify vowels progressively and musically so that the transformation sounds intentional and beautiful. You're not cheating by modifying vowels. You're singing smart by working with physics instead of against it. All right, we've talked extensively about F1 to FO tuning, matching your first formant to your fundamental frequency. But there's a secondary formant tuning strategy that professional sopranos also use, particularly in the middle upper range, F2 to 2FO tuning. F2, your second formant, is the second resonance of your vocal tract. 2FO is the second harmonic of your fundamental frequency, exactly one octave above FO. F2 to 2FO tuning means adjusting your second formant to amplify your second harmonic, the pitch exactly one octave above your fundamental. Here's how this works. Let's say you're singing a C5, around 500 Hz. Your fundamental is 500 Hz. Your second harmonic is 1000 Hz, exactly one octave above. If you position F2 around 1000 Hz, you're amplifying that second harmonic. F2 is controlled primarily by tongue advancement, how far forward or back the tongue is positioned. Lip position also plays a role. Moving the tongue forward raises F2. Pulling the tongue back lowers F2. Lip spreading raises F2, while lip rounding and protrusion lower F2. These adjustments are more subtle than the jaw opening and tongue lowering you use for F1 to FO tuning. You're making smaller, more refined changes to position F2 near 2FO. F2 to 2FO tuning is often employed in the middle upper soprano range, roughly A4 to G5, before F1 to FO tuning becomes the dominant strategy, or simultaneously with F1 to FO tuning at higher pitches. Now this is where it gets interesting. Wolfe and his research group ran a perceptual study in 2017 where they synthesized soprano tones with different formant tuning strategies. F1 to FO tuning alone, F2 to 2FO tuning alone, and both strategies combined, and then neither strategy. Then, they had listeners rate which ones sounded best. The result? Listeners consistently preferred soprano tones where both F1 to FO and F2 to 2FO tuning were happening at once. The combined tuning strategy produced the most natural sounding soprano tones across multiple vowels and pitches. Now, this study used classical soprano tones. Listeners in that context preferred combined tuning. CCM contexts may have different aesthetic preferences. What this means practically. Skilled sopranos are simultaneously managing multiple formant adjustments. They're raising F1 to match fundamental frequency, the primary strategy for maintaining acoustic intensity and projection. And they're positioning F2 near to FO, a secondary strategy that adds richness, fullness, and overall resonance quality. These adjustments sometimes compete with one another. Raising F1 typically involves jaw opening and tongue lowering, but adjusting F2 involves tongue position and lip configuration. You're trying to coordinate multiple articulatory adjustments simultaneously to achieve multiple acoustic goals. This is why developing formant tuning skill takes time and patience. You're not just learning one adjustment, you're learning a coordinated set of adjustments that interact with each other. But some good news. You don't need to consciously control all of this. With practice, your vocal tract learns to make these adjustments automatically in response to pitch changes. What starts as deliberate, effortful modification becomes intuitive and reflexive. In the early stages of skill development, though, it's helpful to isolate individual adjustments. Practice F1 to FO tuning first, jaw opening, progressive vowel opening as pitch ascends. Get comfortable with that. Then start exploring F2 adjustments, subtle lip rounding, slight tongue changes. Eventually, your voice integrates both strategies automatically. F2 to 2FO tuning is a secondary but valuable strategy for sopranos. It adds acoustic richness and fullness to your tone, particularly in the middle upper range. Combined with F1 to FO tuning, it creates the optimal acoustic conditions for upper range singing. You don't need to master this immediately. Start with F1 to FO tuning. That's the primary strategy. But as your skill develops, exploring F2 to 2FO tuning gives you another tool for optimizing your resonance. We've covered a lot of acoustic theory. Now let's make this practical. Start with 5-note scales in the upper middle range, around C5 for sopranos, A4 for mezzos, F4 for altos. Sing a 5-note major scale on the vowel E. As you ascend, progressively open the vowel. Don't wait until you feel strain or acoustic crisis. Start the modification immediately. First time through, make subtle modifications. Just slightly more jaw opening than speech E, slightly lower tongue. The vowel still feels like E, but you're beginning the migration. Second time through, increase the modification. By the top note, the vowel should feel closer to E or even E. More jaw opening, notably lower tongue. Third time through, really commit to the modification. By the top note, you might be approaching the ah or the ah quality. Maximum jaw opening, low tongue position. Notice what happens to the intensity of your sound and how much easier it feels. When you modify appropriately, the top note should feel easier and sound fuller than when you try to maintain speech E. That's F1 to FO tuning in action. Once you're comfortable with E, repeat this exercise on other vowels. Try oo. You'll find it requires similarly dramatic modification. Try E and O, moderate modification needed. Try ah, minimal modification required. The goal? Develop awareness of how much modification each vowel needs at different pitches. This becomes intuitive with practice, but initially you're building conscious control. Choose a high note in your range, around A5 for sopranos, F5 for mezzos, D5 for altos. A pitch where maintaining speech vowels feels challenging. Sing that pitch on E and sustain it. While sustaining the pitch, gradually morph through vowel space. E, I, E, A, Ah. As you morph through these vowels, you're progressively opening your jaw, which naturally allows the tongue to lower. These aren't separate movements. Jaw opening and tongue lowering work together to raise F1. You're raising F1 in real time while holding FO constant. Notice where acoustic intensity maximizes. You'll likely find a specific vowel quality, somewhere in the to a range for E at that pitch, where the note suddenly feels easier and sounds fuller. That's your optimal modification for that pitch. That's the vowel quality you want to arrive at when you're singing E at that pitch in actual repertoire. If you don't feel a clear sweet spot where the note suddenly gets easier, slow down and make more gradual changes through the vowel spectrum. Or try the same exercise on a different pitch where the contrast may be clearer. Sometimes moving up or down a few semitones helps you identify the feeling more distinctly. If you're new to F1 to FO tuning, start practicing on ah first. Why? Because speech F1 for ah is already relatively high, 700 to 900 Hz. You don't need dramatic modification until you get to very high pitches. Practice scales on ah in your upper range. Notice how much easier it feels compared to E or oo. Get comfortable with the sensation of singing high notes on an open vowel. Once you're comfortable with ah, extend to mid-vowels. A. These require moderate modification. Finally, work on closed vowels. E, oo. These are the most challenging because they require the most dramatic transformation. This progression builds confidence and skill systematically. You're not starting with the hardest task, you're building up to it. A few common pitfalls to avoid. First, premature modification. Some singers learn about vowel modification and immediately start opening everything. They're modifying E at C4 when they don't need to. Save the modification for where you actually need it. And this is vowel specific. For open vowels like ah, you need modification around E5 to A5, but for closed vowels like E and oo, skilled singers begin progressive modification much earlier. Research shows professional sopranos start this process a full octave below where it becomes acoustically critical. You might begin subtle E modification as low as E4, even though the acoustic crisis doesn't happen until much higher. Otherwise, you lose vowel definition in the middle range where speech vowels still work fine acoustically for open vowels. Second, the opposite problem: insufficient modification in the upper range. Some singers resist opening vowels when acoustics demand it. They're trying to maintain vowel purity, but they're fighting against physics. If you're singing G5 on E without any modification or even higher without significant modification, you're creating an acoustic problem. You need more modification. Third, sudden shifts instead of gradual migration. Vowel modification should be progressive and musical. If you maintain speech E up to A5, then suddenly drop your jaw to an ah quality, it sounds abrupt and awkward. Start modifications earlier, maybe at E5, and make gradual changes. Smooth migration sounds natural. Abrupt shifts sound desperate. And fourth, over-opening. More modification isn't always better. Find the optimal modification for each pitch, the vowel quality that maximizes resonance without distorting intelligibility beyond what's necessary. You're looking for balance, not extremes. If you've been struggling with high notes, feeling like you're working twice as hard as everyone else for half the result, watching altos and tenors project effortlessly while you're pushing and straining, it's not a technique problem. It's not even an effort problem. You've been trying to use an acoustic strategy that doesn't work for your voice type. High voices can't rely on the singer's formant cluster the way male voices do. Your harmonics are more widely spaced at high pitches. Fewer harmonics fall in the 3 kHz singer's formant region, making that strategy less effective for soprano voices. Instead, you use F1 to FO tuning, matching your first formant to your fundamental frequency by raising F1 through jaw opening and tongue lowering. This requires systematic vowel modification starting well before critical pitches. Vowel modification isn't a failure of technique, it's acoustic necessity. The skill you're building isn't how to maintain speech vowels in the upper range. That's not acoustically viable. It's how to modify vowels progressively and musically so your upper range feels easy, sounds resonant, and projects effortlessly. You're not cheating by modifying vowels. You're singing smart by working with physics instead of against it. Next week, we're diving into the alto voice, the fascinating acoustic middle ground. If you're an alto, you need to master both strategies, singer's formant in your lower range and F1 to FO tuning in your upper range. It's a hybrid approach that gives you unique flexibility, but it also means you need instruction in both acoustic strategies. Next week is specifically for altos and the teachers who work with them. Developing F1 to FO tuning skill, knowing exactly how much to modify each vowel at each pitch, separates consistent upper range singing from hit or miss high notes. It's not talent, it's systematic training. That's exactly what Voci Academy is built for. Structured courses, foundation, strength and head voice, singing in tune, bi-weekly live Q&A, where you get personalized answers about your voice, and practice paths launching in January that track your progress. Systematic skill development instead of scattered practice. 14-day money-back guarantee, link in the description. As always, keep singing smart.